Hi, hello everyone, happy Wednesday. Welcome to April, welcome to British springtime. I'm so happy. Can you believe I'm recording this at like 4 p.m. and it's still gorgeous and bright and sunny outside? And finally, welcome to our March reading wrap up. So for anyone that's new on my channel, my name's Charlotte. I do a monthly reading wrap up and some other kind of like bookish content alongside vlogs and other YouTubey type stuff. I have no reading target for this year and no star rating system. So I'm not gonna lie, I've been really enjoying reviewing books this year so far. So far in 2024, I've read 22 books, which I think is pretty good going. And I feel like I'm definitely reading more given that I've removed the expectation of a target. I don't really know how that works, but I'm delving into longer books as well because I don't feel like I have to get them done by a certain time period. I'm also finding that I'm moving through my physical TBR a lot more quickly, and that is one of my goals this year, is to get through that with a bit more haste and prioritize that. I've mentioned this in every video this year so far, so I apologize, but I am on a book buying ban for at least 6 months. So I'm utilizing the library. I have a Waterstones gift card that I have yet to spend, and this is helping me work my way through my TBR. It's going quite well so far. So let's get started. I read 9 books in March, which I'm really proud of myself for. I'm averaging about 6 books a month so far, which is still really good. I'm still really pleased with that. But yeah, 9. Some of them were short, but 9 is really impressive, I think. So to start with something entirely unserious, I read Unexpectedly Mine by Erin Hawkins. And this is a romance, if you haven't guessed it by the cover and by the title. So I read this on Kindle. The bulk of my reads actually this month were digital in some format, either digital or audio, which I'm trying to read more physical books. So we have our main character, Emma. She is a bridal gown designer and she's at a convention in Vegas called the Blushing Brides Convention, showing off her work. She's at this convention when she gets news of her ex's engagement via social media, and it's her birthday when she finds this out. And I think it's only about 3 months after they've broken up. She decides for her birthday, and in light of this news, to have like one big blowout night in Vegas. And they go to a male strip show, you know, like a Magic Mike type situ, and she gets pulled on stage by Griffin, who is our male main character love interest. I so far have enjoyed Erin Hawkins's books, but for me this was just a scratch above okay. I personally am not obsessed with kind of the like stripper with a heart of gold storyline. It's a bit played out for me, even if it is a male stripper. The main tropes of this book are, you guessed it, marriage of convenience and friends to lovers. So I had fairly high hopes after enjoying book 1 so much, but I think this just wasn't as good for me. I did really enjoy Emma and Griffin's friends to lovers. I genuinely thought how their friendship progresses is like really charming. I really liked their characters becoming friends and that kind of like montagey bit. Something felt weirdly stilted about the whole thing for me. It just didn't, like, it just wasn't meshing. So Erin Hawkins writes a really good spicy sex scene, and I think she wrote a lot of good spice without them actually having sex in this, which I think is a rarity in a lot of romance books because oftentimes it just goes straight to the shagging. It's a nice change of pace, I think, for a smutty book. It was a good, like, low stakes, low angst read. Having read a lot of the reviews to try pinpoint what I think was the issue is that Emma and Griffin are too perfect. That, now hear me out, because I know that sounds quite bad to say characters are too perfect, but they are so thoughtful, so considerate of each other, so kind to each other. And I'm not saying they don't need to be, but it's almost like there wasn't that much grit. They were so perfect that kind of like this third act miscommunication that always comes in these books felt not well placed. It's something as too much perfection in characters, and I think Emma is obviously a very like Virgo-esque perfection person in this. She's very like high strung. She comes from like a moneyed family. Griffin's very much like a perfect boy despite what his career may lead us to think about him, etc. It was okay, like it was enjoyable, but I was just a bit like I needed another very easy read, so the next book was Accidentally Ours by Erin Hawkins. I was getting tattooed when I read these, so I finished Unexpectedly Mine way quicker than I thought I would, and then I was just like, I need something that's just going to distract me, so I just continued into Accidentally Ours. This is Unexpectedly in Love, book 3. Obviously a romance, and I will talk you through the tropes after the synopsis. Sophie, our female main character, she's Griffin's sister, so these books are kind of all interlinked, but not hugely. Sophie is leaving her life in Vegas for a highly coveted internship with an event planning business in New York. She's leaving Vegas and she says farewell to Vegas with a one-night stand with a completely sexy anonymous stranger. They only exchange first names. When she arrives in New York, she finds out that this is her brother's new boss, Hunter Cartwright, who is 13 years older than her, a notorious bachelor, and very wed to his career. So this is about Griffin's sister, obviously. One thing about me is I love a playboy billionaire bachelor turned gentleman. I'm really suckered into that storyline every time, no matter how unrealistic it is, especially when they're like pursuing and wooing and they're doing like really extravagant dates and gifts. It's always some ridiculously rich moneyed behavior and I'm gonna eat it up every single time. So given that this is an age gap romance, I will say I think the age gap is 22 and 36, which is a bit of a random age gap. I'm glad for once it wasn't someone who was 18 because it doesn't sit right with me. If you enjoy it, that's your prerogative. It just doesn't. I'm not comfortable reading it. I'm 28. I don't care about reading about an 18-year-old. So given that it was an age gap romance, I did find Sophie's perspective on things fairly childish, but that does line up with the sheltered life she's led so far. Sheltered-ish. Griffin has like smothered her a bit as an older brother. So one thing I should have seen coming was the pregnancy trope, given the title, Accidentally Ours. It is fairly obvious fairly quickly that there will be a pregnancy trope coming up. I found that quite annoying because, so I don't really love pregnancy tropes in books. I'll read them. It's not like why I'm here. It's not the main event. At 22, she should know better. Now, I'm not shaming her, but she should know better about her body because girl was vomiting and like feeling unwell and ravenous the whole book. Like, she just had the most obvious symptoms. I don't know. Maybe I'm just being harsh. I will say, despite not liking age gap trope or pregnancy trope that much, I did quite enjoy this book because the age gap trope wasn't played upon too heavily, and the pregnancy trope didn't really materialise till fairly near the end of the book. So you still got a large portion of them as a couple without the baby being like a huge integral part of it. I think they're sweet together and I preferred it to book 2. Next up is an audiobook. I'm a little bit in my audiobook bag at the moment. I'm trying to have an audiobook on the go like every month at least, just because I'm not really listening to much music, although Cowboy Carter's just released, so that will change things. But anyway, besides the point, I listened to Friendaholic by Elizabeth Day as an audiobook. I downloaded this from BorrowBox because I have a library subscription, so that was nice. It's non-fiction and it is more of a memoir. So in Friendaholic, our author Elizabeth Day unpacks and explores, I think, the significance of friendship and relationships and all of her friendships and relationships. This book, I think, was a lot to think about. Overall, I found it really refreshing and I went in completely blind, not knowing really what this was about. I didn't even realise it was non-fiction, if I'm honest, until I started listening to it. And yeah, I found it fairly refreshing. I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. I would say, given that I don't consider myself a friendaholic, so I have a very small circle of friends and I wouldn't consider myself a people pleaser, some elements of the book didn't really resonate with me. There were some really poignant parts that really made me cry in it and I didn't think I would cry. While I was listening, this definitely had me feeling very introspective and quite soppy about a lot of my friendships, and it really had me assessing the way I've approached friendships and relationships, especially in like my early and mid-20s. I think if you consider yourself a people pleaser, a friendaholic, a social butterfly, or you're just like a Gemini or a Libra, I think some parts of this book will really, really resonate with you. Some areas were so moving. Like, I love listening to people talk about like their best friends. Like, you know, when they're talking about like the good things about their friends, it like fills my heart with such warmth because I think it's something so special about having female friendships. Like, this is a subject I could talk about forever. So I think the times and chapters of the book where she spoke about that just really moved me because it made me think of my friends that I love and hold like so close to my chest. I do think some of the chapters discussing, because they're so personal to the author, some of the chapters discussing maybe like friendships that didn't work out felt a bit like a character assassination and potentially a little bit self-indulgent, which feels very mean to say because who am I to call like a non-fiction memoir, self-indulgent. That doesn't seem fair of me to say as someone that's not a people pleaser and that doesn't have a lot of friends. So like I completely get where they're coming from. Each chapter I had like that, I tried to put myself in Elizabeth Day's shoes and like think about like my equivalent friendship to that if I had one. But yeah, I think it's a really important listen or an important read. I think if I hadn't have listened to it, I would have lost my engagement a little bit. I think it's a very important listen, especially if you fall into any of my aforementioned criteria. And I don't necessarily know if I learned a lot from it, but I reminded myself of a lot of things. It was good to think about my friends for such an extended period of time. It weirdly made me feel more connected to my friends, even though they like necessarily weren't, knowing that I was thinking of them. Next up was a physical book. My first physical book of the month and one from my TBR. Hope you're all proud of me. I managed to do one TBR book this month and it was The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. Firstly, love this edition. Gorgeous, very old, very tattered, hand me down. This is fiction that is considered a classic, so I guess you could say classic fiction. Esther Greenwood is beautiful, brilliant, talented and successful, but is slowly going under. I say going under, I mean in terms of mental health, and as the reader we are privy of her descent into depression from start to finish. We are the viewers of her breakdown. An American classic, and actually my first Sylvia Plath read. I think that maybe I was not in the right headspace when I read this, because this is a 250-page book and it took me ages to read. While I can see that it is brilliantly poignant and brilliantly written, it just didn't really hit the spot for me. I feel like bad even saying that. I feel like I've missed something from the book. I'm also wondering if this is the kind of book I should have read when I was younger, because when people saw me reading this, like work colleagues or I spoke to friends, so many people like, oh, I read that at school and it was like amazing, and I've reread it and it's like hit the same. And I think it's because I didn't read this when I was like an angsty teenager. Not to make light of Esther's struggles in the book, but I think I can definitely see this hitting for me when I was like 17, 18 versus now. I did know going into it that there was quite a rife amount of racism and homophobia featured in this book, which I'm not gonna lie, it was a bit of a struggle to get through. I think it like took me out of the book a bit, but I just had to keep reminding myself that although wrong, it's indicative of the time period that the book was written in. My own personal thoughts aside, the writing is so distinctive. I think maybe that's why I took a little while to get through it. Like the writing style is so deliberate, and I think the descent into the depression and the breakdown is so well written. It's so accurate that it's like quite an uncomfortable read at some points, and the book has like I don't know if spiralic is the word, but like a spiraling quality. Like obviously we see that she's like spiraling further into her breakdown, but it's this kind of like spiral into depression where some days it's like almost just right again and then it's not right. Very blunt, very to the point in her writing style, which is what makes it so distinctive. I think I can see why it's considered like an American classic. I just found it a tough read, and knowing that it's like based a lot on her life and her experiences, I think makes it a tougher read, and I think I wasn't in a very good headspace when I read this, which made it an even tougher read. I can see why this is some people's favourites, but I probably won't be revisiting it or rereading it. I loved the writing style. I loved the writing style. I just think it is hard subject matter. I'm not usually one to shy away from hard subject matter, but yeah, it just didn't do it for me. Another Kindle book, I read What Did You Do by Janine O'Reilly, which is the Infatuated Fae book 2 from the series. This is a fantasy romance, are we surprised? This review is going to somewhat contain spoilers because I read book 1 last year and it's really hard to review this without spoiling it. So just bear that in mind if you'd like to skip forward. It's not going to be huge spoilers, like I'm not going to say what happens at the end, but it's going to be that I'm talking about a sequel in which I cannot avoid kind of spoilering what happens. So just, yeah, you've got 5 seconds to skip forward. Ready? That wasn't 5 seconds, I apologise. Synopsis. Callie, our main character, has been reunited with her family in the Seelie realm. She is struggling to come to terms with what she had to do to get there. I think it's fair to say she's pretty haunted by the relationship her and Mendax had. So Mendax is the Unseelie prince. Their bond, their memories together. He's visiting her in her dreams. Turns out her assassination attempt on him has actually failed. He is visiting her in his dreams, and he is determined to get her back, punish her, punish everyone for taking her away from him, and just generally wreak havoc on the Seelie Kingdom. So the first book of this was How Does It Feel? I'm going to put the cover in now, and you're probably going to have seen a TikTok about it where everyone was like, oh my god, this was amazing, it ripped my heart out in two. The dedication in the book was amazing. Like, I read it and I get the hype. It was bad good. Anyway, this is not a review of the first book. So yeah, the second book's finally come out. I really struggled to remember what happened in the first book, and I was not the only one after consulting with some BookTok friends. I didn't want to reread the first book before I read this, so I was just read a little synopsis, spark notes, and dove straight in. I mean that in the most polite, respectful way. When I say something is bad, it's good, because it's the vibe that I'm rating it on. It's not how good the story and the writing is. I had some high hopes for this book, but I generally understand that sequels feel quite messy, especially with such big plots like the first book had, and a lot of twists and turns. So I had somewhat high hopes, but wasn't expecting a masterpiece. I will say some parts of the book felt a little bit repetitive once I'd got to grasps with who everyone was, where we were, what was going on. And I think the love triangle aspect of the book felt quite like shunted in. It didn't feel very natural. It was a little bit forced, I think. So Mendax is obviously back, hotter, more psychotic than ever, and I do enjoy him playing that part, and I'm glad they kept him as playing that part, because every person in this is very grey. Like, no one's good and bad. But it feels like with the love triangle, the author is setting us up for book 3 to be like a Why Choose style romance, and the Eli, who's the other half of the love triangle, he wasn't mentioned that much in book 1, and when he was mentioned in like a best friend capacity, so all of a sudden it felt like, oh, we're getting Eli as like a sexual and romantic interest. It just wasn't very clear to me in the beginning. I don't know, I don't feel like I'm really explaining this very well. Some of the spice scenes just felt like we were being shoehorned into this Why Choose thing. So like, for example, Mendax is doing some stuff with Callie in front of Eli, who is like bound and gagged and restrained to like assert his dominance. But there's like guards bashing down the door, and that stressed me out reading that, because it's like a race against time. And Eli's like obviously kind of like angry at Mendax, but also like eyes enjoying it. And I wasn't like fully engaged when I was reading that scene, because it just didn't feel like now was the right time and place. I know that that's not Mendax's specialty, but I hope that makes sense. I think we are definitely being set up for a Why Choose, or at least one threesome scene, because it feels like towards the end of the book as well, Mendax lost his psychotic edge towards Eli, which just felt a bit un-Mendax-like. Not sure if I really liked this book, or I didn't not like it, but I don't know if I liked it. I read it and it was good, but yeah, I definitely will read the third. I just don't really know how to feel about this. I don't know. Let me know what you think. I'd be really curious to see if anyone else has read this and like what you all think. Like, I just read the book and it just like happened to me, and I was like, okay. But I didn't like come away like, oh my god, that was wild, loved it, blah blah blah, XYZ. But I expected that. I'm done rambling about this book now. Let's move on to the next one. Next book from the library. Loving the library at the moment. Great. It's like book shopping without book shopping. Can't believe it took me this long to get back into the library. I read Eileen by Ottessa Moshfegh. Come on, Eileen. So this is a fiction mystery thriller. Mystery/thriller. Eileen lives a very mundane, repetitive life. She cares for her alcoholic father, and she works as a secretary at the boys' prison for like young offenders. She dreams of escaping this life though. Her nights and weekends are filled with petty crimes like shoplifting and cleaning up after her father's increasingly deranged alcoholic messes. A new counsellor arrives at the prison, Rebecca St. John, and Eileen is just captivated, enthralled. She's got so much charisma. Eileen is just enchanted, and this pulls her into a series of events, into a crime that she wasn't expecting. Oh, I loved this book. I love Ottessa Moshfegh. I've read 3 books by her now, and controversially, My Year of Rest and Relaxation is actually at the bottom of that pile. It was alright. I need to reread it, but it was alright. I feel like I'm shouting. Sorry if I'm shouting. I love her writing so much. She has such a talent for writing grotesque bodily horror. She really hates the human body. I really love that like disgusting style of writing. Although I will say there is quite a lot of emphasis on puking in this book. She always manages to make her books really uncomfortable reads. She writes a very unlikable character, a very unlikable female character that really gets under your skin and just makes you feel a bit ugh. Eileen as a character is despicable and grotesque, and despite this all like inherently feminine, she rips clothes intentionally. She has very uncouth and at point disgusting thoughts. She touches herself and then doesn't wash her hands before shaking the next person's hands. She's very grotesque. Despite this, sometimes you still find yourself rooting for her and like to escape her mundane life, and you carry on reading because you want to find out if she ever leaves Exville. Not sure how I feel about the ending, and that's probably what stops this from being like a 5 or 6 star read for me, is because even though I knew something like this would happen, the pacing difference between like the last pages and the rest of the book feels almost like 2 different books. It moves so slowly up until it doesn't. I love character driven books. I think I've realised at this point, especially written by her. But yeah, the fact that it feels almost like 2 completely separate books. But then I say that and I don't know what I would have wanted to happen at the end. Like, I knew something similar to this was going to happen, but like I do not know what I would have wanted to happen. I feel like I have such a distinct style in what I like about writing, but I can't quite put my finger on it. It's delicious, it's despicable, it's vulgar. I loved it. My next book was another audiobook, and it was Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, which is a fiction. But this was on Spotify actually. I didn't know you get 15 free hours of audiobook with Spotify Premium, and I've only just really signed up for Spotify. I wasn't using it, so yeah, if you've got a spare 10 hours, because this is a short one, go have a look. June Hayward and Athena Liu are what I would describe as frenemies. They were in the same year at Yale and they published their debut novels the same year, but the difference is Athena became a cross-genre literary prodigy, and June didn't even get her book printed into paperback for a paperback release. When June witnesses Athena's freak death, she does something really impulsive and steals Athena's secret manuscript and publishes it under the author name Juniper Song. Athena is Chinese American, and the book is about Chinese history in the war, and June is white, just for more context. I really liked this book. The author for this book was so good, and I usually don't love American narrators, but it fits so well. You can really hear the disgust and the disdain dripping off this author's voice when they talk. June is so cringingly wrong, delusional, racist and stupid that it's like watching a car crash. Like, you can't tear your eyes away. I was very much hooked. I cleared through this in like 24 hours. It just keeps getting worse and worse. It's definitely got a satirical note to it about like the state of publishing and the publishing industry that probably went a little bit over my head, I'll admit. The exploration of racism and plagiarism is so interesting because I think it leads to the bigger question of like who should be writing what and what is appropriate for people to write, to which I don't have an answer, but it's really interesting from that angle. I binge listened to this, like I said, because I just needed to know what happened. Like, it was so tense at some points. it was actually just like making me cringe. I will say the frenemies angle between June and Athena was really interesting, and I kind of wish we had a bit more time with that at the beginning. R.F. Kuang is quite good at writing like fairly insufferable main characters. I've read The Poppy War and I found main character from that a little bit, it wasn't black and white, it was a bit grey. I was like, you're annoying me, but also I'm really interested in reading about you. I mean, this character is just unlikable. Like, June is just insufferable. I feel like in the first instance you're supposed to be like a little bit sympathetic of June, because you can see the spiraling, like you can see how it got to that point, and the way she is absolutely delusional and that she is like convincing herself that she's not in the wrong is crazy. I feel like her character development, she just ends up being completely uncomplex because she's just stupid and racist. So delusional. It's like you think it can't get any worse, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. All of that being said, and that I enjoyed it so much, I felt like the last quarter of the book lost me a little bit. I felt like it became a little directionless with the plot. I don't think directionless is maybe the right word. I think it just like lost steam or momentum. But I also wondered if that was kind of a commentary that no one is really truly like cancelable these days. I personally don't think like people can get cancelled, because everyone just seems to persevere through it and people forget. So I was wondering if it was a commentary on that. But if you've read this, I'd be really, really interested to know your thoughts, because yeah, I really, really, really enjoyed it up until I wasn't sure. On to my 9th and my last book of the month.
Hello everyone, it's Charlotte from the future. Apologies for interrupting your viewing pleasure, but I've unfortunately deleted my opinion and review for book 8, which was Beach Read by Emily Henry. I will put my thoughts on the book in the comments for you. There's no way to recover the footage. I didn't actually really have that much to say about it, so you've not missed out that much. But yeah, anyway, enjoy the rest of the video.
It Was a Short Stay in Hell by Stephen L. Peck. This is a fiction and it's a novella, so it's very short, about 100 pages. So, family man, geologist and Mormon Soren Johansson is dead. He dies and he finds himself in a version of hell that he wasn't quite expecting. This hell is a vast, beyond our comprehension, vast library. And he's been told that he can only escape from hell if he finds the book or books containing his life story. I just had really bad deja vu. So this story is short, like I said, it's a novella, about 100 pages, recommended to me by one of my closest friends, and I can't lie, I loved it. I feel like this is going to be a comfort read for me. It's hard for me to determine what becomes a comfort read for me. Like, I don't know what factors it is, but this one is. I will say that if you don't like books that leave you with more questions than answers, you are probably not going to like this book. It's a very short, very existential read with a lot of philosophical themes. I have seen some people class this as a horror in reviews, and to be honest, it is not a horror by any stretch of the imagination. It does, however, leave you with a almost continuous sense of dread throughout the book. You feel like you're waiting for something terrible to happen the whole book. Don't ask me why this is going to come a comfort read. I've got no fucking clue. There's lots of religious overtones with Soren being a Mormon and having to unpack everything he has learned in his life about what is heaven and what is hell. I like it at first because the dread doesn't quite settle in. You think to be in a vast library with lots of other people, with whatever food and drink you can have, trapped in a body where you're somewhere in your 20s, where no injury can befall you, where everything is self-cleaning, that sounds like a pretty good run, and then you realise that that is in fact hell. You think that that would be paradise, like hypothetically, and it's clearly not. We learn very quickly that being homogenous becomes very boring because everyone in the library seems to be young, fit, healthy, white and English speaking. I just loved it. I felt like it was a very immersive read. I spread it out over 2 days because I knew that I would do it in one sitting. There were some bits that I felt really sad about. I just thought, oh my god, like it heart-wrenched me a bit. The notion of like this very white, very clean library really was giving me like liminal space vibes, like, you know, the back rooms and stuff like that. I'm quite surprised I didn't dream about it because it's that kind of like repetitive corridor, repetitive stairwell. I'm a very visual person, so when I have a book that I can envision it so crisply. Like I could paint it, I could draw it, I could sketch it. Lots of those types of books become very comforting reads for me because I can just see it very, very clearly. My only criticism is that I would have loved to have seen more done with the concept of the library. I felt some areas we like zoned in on were very repetitive, but that is life in the library. It's very repetitive. It's again more of a character driven and like philosophical book, which like I said earlier is books that I lean towards. And also, do you know what, like I know a lot of people don't like short stories. I love novellas and short stories. Some of my favourite books are novellas and short stories, and oftentimes my mark of a good novella or short story is how desperately I want it to be a full-size novel, and this is one of those ones. I would have loved it to be 300 pages. I'm never going to get that. I've been left with more questions than answers. So that for me is like how good I find it. I just love like yearning for more from books though, so I know that's not a good feeling for a lot of people. But yeah, that was my review of all my March reads. Let me know what you think. I'd be really interested to hear what your thoughts were, if you've read any of those books, and if so, what you thought of them as well. If you're new here and you enjoyed my video, hit the subscribe button. I do these monthly reading wrap-ups and also some other bookish content. I will put my story graph and all my socials as usual in the description box below. But yeah, you can follow me on there. You can add me as a friend on Storygraph if you want to keep up to date with what I'm reading, and I do post what I'm reading on my Instagram stories as well, like live on the day. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you all, and I will see you on the next video. I upload on Wednesdays and Sundays. Have a lovely rest of your day.